In 1930, a tax levy appeared on the November ballot, asking Lucas County residents to pay for the operation of a regional park district. The park system had existed on paper for 2 years, but needed funds to acquire land and actually create the parks themselves. This film was created to show voters some of the areas that could be preserved as parkland if the measure passed. It focused on property along Lake Erie, Swan and 10 Mile Creeks, and the Maumee River, including many areas that would later become Metroparks. Unfortunately, the county was already suffering in the grips of the Great Depression, and the levy was defeated. It was 40 years before Metroparks tried again. The levy setback might have been the end of the park district if it weren't for the efforts of W. Farnsworth, the Secretary-Director of the Toledo Metropolitan Park Board. Farnsworth was also an Ohio State Senator who used the demise of the Miami and Erie Canal to help build a park system. By the end of the 19th century, the canals that facilitated trade and travel between the Ohio River and Lake Erie were eclipsed by the speed and the efficiency of the railroads. Senator Farnsworth proposed that the state lease the abandoned canal lands to Ohio's park districts. The resulting legislation created parkland throughout the state and gave Northwest Ohio the basis of its first 4 parks. Sidecut was the area's first Metropark, opening in 1931 with 2 picnic tables and a well. The park takes its name from the side cut that once connected the main branch of the canal with the Maumee River at this site. The limestone locks that allowed boats to pass between the canal and the river are still visible in the park.
The summer season, it's a wonderful picnic and recreation area for all ages, and people are naturally drawn to the river. The cooling effect of it, the migratory birds that come through the area are just phenomenal.
It's known for deer because deer are very easy to see down there. And of course in the spring it's the walleye run that we know Sidecut for, because the walleye run up in huge numbers and hundreds of fishermen at any one time can be seen lining the river fishing for the walleye. So it's a tremendous resource along a really key part of the river.
Since 1931, Sidecut has expanded from 90 to over 560 acres and now encompasses Bluegrass Island, the Audubon Island State Nature Preserve in the Maumee River, and the Fallen Timbers Monument.
The monument site, which is an Ohio Historical Society site, was established in the 1920s, and that was to recognize and commemorate the Battle of Fallen Timbers. So they actually located or sited the monument there overlooking the floodplain and the river, and that was really the prize from the Battle of Fallen Timbers.
Farnsworth Metropark along US 24 in Waterville is a long, narrow belt of riverfront parkland. Farnsworth Metropark was originally called Waterville Park, but during a meeting in 1937, Metropolitan Park Board President W. Knight asked Senator Farnsworth to leave the room. The remaining 2 commissioners then named the park in honor of W. Farnsworth as a testament to his years of service to the park district.
Behind me directly, we have a limestone outcrop in the middle of the river, Roche des Bout, or the Boot Rock, and that was a ceremonial place for Native Americans for many, many years. And that's just downstream from a very large island that's owned by the state of Ohio, Missionary Island.
It's one of the most beautiful spots in Ohio, the Roche des Bout Rapids right there. Below the shelter house is incredible for shorebirds, for scenery. It's got the old interurban bridge in the background, which is painted by virtually every landscape painter that comes through Toledo. It's also, I think, the best strolling park in the district. There's just no better place on a summer afternoon than to stroll right along the river at Farnsworth and just take in the breeze, take in the river flowing past. It combines water, walking, wildlife. It's just a great spot.
The Towpath Trail connects Farnsworth, Benview, and Providence Metroparks. The 8-mile scenic walkway follows the route once used by mules pulling boats down the Miami and Erie Canal. Hidden along the towpath trail and accessible only by foot, stands one of the area's best-kept secrets, Bend View Metropark.
Well, if you haven't been there, there's probably a good reason. 2.1 miles or 2.4 miles, depending upon where you start, you get to walk into Benview. What a wonderful spot. If you look at Benview from an aerial map or a satellite map, it sits on almost a 90-degree bend in the Maumee River.
I considered it being an ideal location because it didn't have $1 million view, it had a $2 million view. It had $1 million in each direction.
Opened in 1935, it boasts only 1,000 feet of river frontage, but what it lacks in size and convenience, it more than makes up for in scenery.
I have to tell you, the engineers that built the Benview shelter house there in 1941 were certainly visionary. They knew the Maumee River, they came out here, and they put the shelter right in the center point of that 90-degree bend that overlooks the Maumee River. What a view, what a treat.
Providence Metropark is named for the 19th century town that once stood on this site. It's located adjacent to the Providence Dam that was constructed in the 1830s to supply the canal line with water. The park incorporates scenic beauty with a strong historic connection, providing visitors a first-hand look at life on the canal line.
Providence is a very unique, exciting historic site. It's one of the only places in the country where you can board a replica canal boat from the 19th century, pass through an original 19th century stone lock, and view and go through an operating water-powered mill that was all original to that site. So many sites that we see today are conglomerations of things that have been brought in because they were going to be destroyed. Providence is all in its original location. So when you're going through that lock, you're going through the very same lock that thousands and thousands of boats did during the 19th century.
Ignored at Providence, though, I think, is the natural qualities that are down there. There's some really wonderful bottomland, forested areas down there, great wildlife, and the rapids below the dam are great fishing. Some wonderful trails that are ignored because people, they congregate to the canal boat, which is understandable. What is now the Isaac Ludwig Mill was not part of the park system. It was called the Heising Mill in those days. One of the previous owners was a relative of the L in L&K, Cleo Ludwig, and a gentleman named Ray Gillespie made the approach to Mr. Ludwig and arranged for that mill to be purchased by Mr. Ludwig and donated to the park system. Little did we know at the time, but that became the cornerstone of what is now the canal experience.
We didn't have to imagine that what would it be like to build a canal. We already had a canal, and we had different segments of the canal. All we had to do was put it together. And sure enough, engineering-wise, we could make the lock work. All we had to do was get some funding from the state to punch a hole in the highway to build a bridge so we could get the canal back where it used to be. As it turns out, build a heck of a canal project.
Although the Great Depression helped defeat the first park levy, the resulting public works projects had a massive impact on the parks themselves. Thousands of area craftsmen and laborers with the Works Progress Administration and the Civilian Conservation Corps constructed playgrounds, dams, trails, cabins, and shelter houses, many of which are still in use today, transforming the early Metroparks into attractive, accessible, and most important, affordable destinations just when the public needed them most.
Pearson Metropark is maybe the largest remnant left of what was the Great Black Swamp, which was a swamp forest, incredibly large, stretched all the way from Port Clinton to the Maumee River. And it was called by some of the early settlers the most miserable wilderness in America.
The Great Black Swamp was the biggest obstacle to settlement of this area, and one of the reasons that settlement occurred in Northwest Ohio so much later than it did in the rest of the state.
There are plenty of cottonwoods here in the park. They like the moist ground, which, you know, with it being a swamp. So we have tons of those, yeah, and enough to where it almost looks like it's snowing out here when the cotton gets flying.
Basically, Pearson is a recreation park, which is unique for this particular park because most of the other parks don't have the tennis courts or the ball fields and those types of activities. We have 9 ball fields, we have tennis courts, we have pedal boats. Another good feature that we also have in the wintertime is a sledding hill. But then there's also the occasion where you can visit our window on wildlife and get the migratory birds through.
You may have a chance to see deer, fox. Of course, the usual is the squirrels and the rabbits and the raccoons. Once the sun comes out, we have plenty of turtles. Just look for a log that might be sticking out of one of the ponds and you'll see anywhere up to half a dozen of them laying out in the sun sunning themselves.
The park is surrounded on all 4 sides by residential development and commercial development. It's sort of like an island there, so that makes it really special. The property that Pearson Metropark is on was originally about 600 acres of wooded area. A lot of that area had been bought by speculators and lost by speculators too. As time went on, we got closer and closer to the Depression. The ownership was transferred from one bank to another. As one bank failed, another bank would buy up those notes, and it just came to be called the Banklands because nobody was sure who owned what. It had changed hands so many times. George Pearson, who was a reporter for the Toledo Blade and lived on the east side, had a regular daily column called the East Side News. And when he rode the interurban railway in to work at the Blade every day, he rode past the Banklands. And he'd say to himself, what a beautiful place it was, and we really ought to preserve that.
The property was in danger of being lost. And George Pearson began a campaign through using his Blade connections and using his community connections to rally support behind the notion that Oregon East Toledo needed this 320-acre park.
Through Pearson's efforts and a fundraising campaign by the East Toledo Club, the land was purchased. Work crews from the CCC began draining the swamp and landscaping. The WPA built picnic grounds and shelter houses. In 1934, just before the dedication, the Metropolitan Park Board announced that the new park would be named for George Pearson. Today, his legacy endures as one of the area's most popular Metroparks. Max Shephurst was the CCC's landscape architect at Pearson Park. Following the death of W.W. Farnsworth in 1939, he became secretary director of the Metroparks. Shephurst enlisted a group of naturalists to help him identify areas that the park system should preserve. They quickly focused their attention on the oak openings.
Oak Openings is an incredible place. It's the epicenter of biodiversity in Northwest Ohio. There's more rare plants and animals here than any place in the state. There's over 125 state endangered, threatened, or potentially threatened plants and animals in this preserve alone that we monitor.
At the Oak Openings, if you love endangered species and birds, that is the hot spot. And people from all over the United States and even from abroad come to that site, and we have that in our own backyard.
The fact that there's all the wildlife and all the plants and that were one of the first attractions of the people who set aside this area. On the other hand, it also was very cheap land back then. Nobody wanted it.
Exactly what made it desirable for us, the fine natural area, the poor soil that spawned all the endangered species, made it not a nice place for the rest of the community. So the land values out here were very, very low. We were able to acquire large tracts for a relatively small amount of money.
The land we're standing on today costs $7 an acre, to give you an idea. So it's invaluable land at this time.
Today, Metropark personnel are attempting to revive many of the endangered plants and animals that once flourished in the Oak Openings region.
In the areas of land management or stewardship of the land, We do something that people think is kind of contrary to what a park's mission is all about. Sometimes we cut down trees, and those trees that we remove are often non-native trees that have been brought in over the years. We also do prescribed burns. With that, you're returning an important natural component to the land, which is fire. So we've reintroduced it in some of our park areas where it's a good management method to use. What the fire does is blackens the soil, it returns nutrients to the soil, and it favors our native species. And the oak trees with their thicker bark are very tolerant of fire, so they can handle it quite well.
The seeds of rare plants can hang out in these soils for over a century, just waiting to be liberated by the proper treatment. What treatment? Of course, it would be fire. If we clear some of the shrubby areas, burn them, you'd see a plethora of incredible things happen.
Secor Metropark opened in 1953 and was purchased with the revenue from a downtown parking lot bequeathed to the Park District by Arthur J. Secor. Much of the land was once the Jacob Wolfinger Farm, and the Wolfinger Cemetery is still located inside the park.
Secor Metropark's like a mini oak openings. Historically, it was where oak savanna met wet prairie. Tall grass prairie there is incredible.
It's a very diverse park. It goes from the tall woodland all the way out to prairie and meadow and everything in between. Huge tulip trees, huge oak trees, big maples. And it's part of the oak opening, so it's part of that same story of lots of endangered and threatened species.
Secor Metropark is the home for the National Center for Nature Photography, a gallery and educational center for photographers.
We're talking about photography, but we're really teaching natural area preservation there. And the idea that what you photograph are things that we all want to save.
The park also contains a memorial to Max Shepurst, director of the Metroparks for 30 years. When Bob Metz succeeded Shepurst in 1968, he faced an immediate financial challenge. A poor economy and shrinking county funds threatened the future of the park system. The Metroparks appealed to voters twice in 1970 without success, and the park board considered closing parks and selling land to raise operating funds. But in 1971, voters approved a .5 mil levy that allowed the park district to hire employees and enhance programs. It also funded development of the Swan Creek Preserve.
Every time I drive on 475 and get over there by the 75 split over near the Jeep plant, I think a little bit about Swan Creek Preserve.
Swan Creek was originally created to replace land that was taken for the expressway near the Jeep plant, going through Willys Park and Merrill Field and some of the other recreation areas in the West Toledo.
It's a park that came about because other parks were destroyed. Because that land was taken, there were some federal programs that offered reimbursements to the community. As it happened at that time, the Park District, which didn't have anything to do with Germain and Willys, those were city parks, but the Park District had the opportunity to apply for some special federal funds. So we had federal funding coming into the community. We were eligible to use that money as matching money to get additional grants. And by purchasing Swan Creek through the Park District, we were able to make a much larger park happen.
With that, they were able to put together a 412-acre nature preserve. It was designated as a preserve, recognizing the uniqueness of Swan Creek and some of the geologic features that are there. It has hillsides that come down to the creek that face all different points of the compass. So on those different hillsides, you find a rich number and quantity of wildflowers that are just wonderful in the springtime and into the summer.
Swan Creek was the bottomlands, a lot of floodplain area. There's some overlooks. You can look out over the creek. There's a lot of wildlife nobody expected, and right in the middle of the city, totally surrounded by urban population. So a lot of things would surprise you to see down there you wouldn't expect in the city.
R.A. Stranahan was the founder of Champion Sparkplug and built his fortune in Toledo. The Stranahan home, located in Sylvania Township, hosted the elite of society and politics, and the grounds featured an idyllic combination of tall grass prairies, wooded ravines, and winding streams on their way to the Ottawa River. In 1973, a local developer announced plans to purchase the Stranahan estate and build an affluent housing development on the site. But Dr. Bill Mewborn, a local veterinarian, had other ideas. He approached the Metropark board about preserving the land as a park.
That was a property that we knew about, and we dreamed that someday it would be wonderful to own. But even with the levy that we had just passed, we knew it wasn't possible to afford that property. So we had sort of reluctantly decided that even though it was prime parkland, it probably wasn't feasible to acquire it. What we hadn't counted on was a fireball by the name of Dr. Bill Mewborn.
He said, if you think you can get the board to approve the purchase, I'll be glad to be chairman of a committee that would round up support. And so Bill Mewborn, he and John Lusk were the two individuals who, one was the chairman of the committee and the other was the firecracker that lit things up.
This was at a time when levies were just not passing at all. The local establishment obviously was against that happening because there was going to be a fantastic development.
Nobody gave us a snowball's chance of saving that property. The political experts said no way. The economy was in the dumps, especially the construction industry, and here was a proposal to build a multi-million-dollar development that would have put a lot of people to work. But a lot of people came forward once the issue became open and said, you can build those houses someplace else.
And it was kind of the average citizen against the big money guy.
And part of the development gave us something to kind of fight against. You know, we can stop the big bag developer and save this, and a lot of people tied into that.
We put a levy on the ballot, and it was promoted very well. Basically, it was either vote for this or we're going to lose it, and it passed.
Metroparks held community meetings to determine the best use of the property. Volunteers helped restore the Stranahan home, renaming it the Manor House. It wasn't long before Metroparks offered tours, and the voting public stood in line.
This majestic building behind me, the Manor House, used to be the former estate of Robert and Paige Stranahan, and the Stranahans built this home in 1938. And it is a home for a wonderful group of programs that we have here at the Manor House. One of our very popular programs is Holidays in the Manor House. It started out years ago with the name Homespun Holidays, and it's grown to Holidays in the Manor House. That 8 days, we fill this house with the most majestical decorations you can imagine, and we have over 900 volunteers who help us that week. And that week alone, we usually get 15,000 to 16,000 people come through the house just to enjoy the holidays.
When Wildwood Preserve opened to the public in 1975, it was love at first sight. And a recent expansion that included the addition of a boardwalk, historic one-room schoolhouse, and other facilities have only deepened the public connection.
It is beyond a doubt our most popular park in the park system, which is a very, very good thing. We probably have half of our annual visitation showing up here at Wildwood. The negative on that one is overuse. And we have to be very, very careful of that one as well so that we don't find ourselves in a position of all the resources that we intend to protect are simply overrun.
Gene Ward became director of Metroparks in 1985 as the district pursued new community projects. From working with the National Park Service on preserving the Fallen Timbers National Battlefield site, to helping area students develop an appreciation for the world around us.
It's really hard to talk about the environmental aspects of the Metroparks without focusing on the history as well, and vice versa.
If you specialize in living history, you have fallen timbers and the canal lands. The Black Swamp is a wonderful history lesson, and once you look at it not as a place where there's high water and mosquitoes and heavy-duty clay to walk through, but it's a place where there's a great habitat that's remaining, and you link it to your history, your Ohio history, it makes interpretation and education much more fun.
Linear parks began intersecting communities when Metroparks partnered on the first Rails to Trails projects in Northwest Ohio, creating the University Parks Trail and the Wabash Cannonball Trail.
High on the public's list is connectors and corridors that they can use as bike trails, walking trails, rollerblading, things that connect down into the neighborhood level. So it's really thinking of what big pieces can we save, but at the same time providing connections right to the neighborhood level.
Jim Spengler became director of Metroparks in 2001. A year later, voters approved a 10-year land acquisition levy to fund the purchase of additional parkland. 300 acres north of Pearson Metropark were acquired, effectively doubling its size. More land was preserved in the Oak Openings region, and the Metroparks began developing new properties such as the Blue Creek Conservation Area.
It's important because pretty soon these preserves are all that's going to be left. That's why doing as much as we can today, acquiring as much land, managing it properly, that's the best thing we can leave future generations, without a doubt.
We have a window the next 10 years to do a lot of acquisition, so if we do that right, that will really paint the character of this area for a long time.
There's only so much land that is available, and this is one thing that you can't make any more of. So we have to be activists and very aggressive with preserving land.
We are not just looking at yesterday and today and tomorrow. What we're thinking about is 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now.
When it comes to preservation, if you don't get it when it's available, you lose it. If you don't get it for the citizens to use, it's developed or something else happens to it. So what we do now will help generations be able to enjoy something that would be lost forever.
Whether it was back in the 20s or now, the story is the same. We have growth and development. The city is growing. I mean, they worried about it in the 20s just as much as we do now. And if we don't get the land, it means, you know, our choices will be less in the future. So it's remarkable how that theme has stayed intact for 75 years and will for another 75 years.